not agree. We made a vow to love each other. We should have faith and wait. A second wife is not the answer, Ibironke pleaded. Ibironke, we have waited for so long. I cannot bear this emptiness any longer. The elders suggest that taking a second wife might bring us the child we desire. Akintayo said, once upon a time, in the serene village of Ore, the air was always filled with the song of birds and the laughter of children. The villagers were a close knit community, bound by tradition and mutual respect. Among them, Akintayo was known as a diligent farmer, always the first to rise and the last to rest. His crops flourished under his care, earning him the admiration of his neighbors. He was tall and strong with kind eyes that always seemed to be smiling. Akintayo's life took a joyous turn when he married Ibironke, a woman whose beauty and grace were unparalleled in the village. Ibironke was not just beautiful, she was intelligent, compassionate, and always ready to help those in need. Their wedding was the talk of the village, a grand celebration that lasted 3 days and nights, filled with music, dance, and feasting. Together, Akintayo and Ibironke built a modest but happy home. They walked side by side in the field, shared stories under the starlight sky, and dreamed of a future they would build together. They often spoke of the children they hoped to have, imagining their laughter filling their home, their tiny feet running through the field. But as the years passed, their dreams of children remained unfulfilled. This absence began to cast a shadow over their happiness. The weight of childlessness bore down on Akintayo and Ibironke as the years passed. In Ore, children were not just seen as blessing, they were the essence of one's legacy, the continuation of one's lineage, and the guarantee of support in old age. Each time a childless couple walked through the village, gossips followed them, unkind and relentless. Every night, Akintoya would sit alone, staring in the darkness, his mind wandering with thoughts. He loved Ibironke deeply, but the pressure from his family and the gossips of the villagers disturbed his spirit. The elders constantly reminded him of his duty to continue his lineage. Their words echo in his ears, growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. Desperation began to cloud his judgment. One fateful evening, Akintayo and Ibironke sat in their veranda watching the day end. The air was cool and the scent of flowers filled the air. Akintayo turned to Ibironke with a heavy heart. Ibironke, my love, it has been 4 years and still we have no child. I have been thinking, perhaps it is time for me to take a second wife. Akintayo said cautiously. Ibironke's heart sank. She had feared this moment might come, but hoped it never would. Tears streaming down in her face. as she looked at Akintayo with sadness in her eyes. No, Akintayo, I do not agree. We made a vow to love each other. We should have faith and wait. A second wife is not the answer, Ibironke pleaded. Ibironke, we have waited for so long. I cannot bear this emptiness any longer. The elders suggest that taking a second wife might bring us the child we desire. Akintoya said with emotion. Ibironke turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. Akintoya, I understand your pain, but I believe that our time will come. We should not abandon our vows and love for each other. A second wife will not solve our problems. Their arguments escalated, emotions running high. Akintayo's frustration over, and in a moment of rage, he hit Ibironke. She fell on the ground, her head hitting the stone. Akintayo panicked as he realized what he has done. He knelt beside her, calling her name, but she lay still, unresponsive. But Akintayo feared the worst, people finding out what he has done. In his fear and confusion, he decided to hide his terrible act. He carried Ibironke's body to the forest nearby and dug a shallow grave. He buried his wife, not knowing or checking if she was truly dead or just unconscious. The weight of his actions began to press down on him, but he couldn't turn back now. The deed has been done. The next morning, the villagers woke to the news of Ibironke's disappearance. Akintayo, with a face of worry and confusion, told the villagers that Ibironke had gone to the market and never returned. The villagers organized search parties, searching the forest and nearby areas. But there were no trace of her. Days turned into weeks, and the search gradually ceased. People began to accept that Ibironke might never return. Akintayo's lie had worked, but the guilt bit at him, an ever-present reminder of his crime. He threw himself into his work, trying to forget the woman he had loved and lost due to his own stupidity. A year passed, and the wound of Ibironke's disappearance seems to have healed in the eyes of the villagers. Akintayo decided it was time to move on with his life. He began courting Bisi, a kind-hearted and beautiful maiden from the neighboring village. Bisi was gentle and caring, and soon the village buzzed with the news of Akintayo's upcoming wedding. Preparing for the wedding were in full swing. The village square were decorated with colorful clothes and flowers, and the aroma of delicious food filled the air. Akintayo seemed to have found happiness again, but deep inside, the guilt of his past lingered like a dark shadow. One evening, as the wedding drew near, Akintayo returned home late from his meeting with the village elders. He walked into his living room and immediately sensed something was wrong. The room was not as he left it in the morning. The chairs were rearranged, and Ibironke's favorite verse, which he had smashed in his anger, stood whole on the table. Akintayo's heart raced. He knew no one had been in the house. How could this be? He chalked it up to exhaustion and tried to dismiss it from his mind. But the strange occurrences continued. Every night, he heard whispers in the wind, and shadows seemed to move on their own. One morning, as he prepared to bathe, he poured water into the bucket for bathing, only to return and see that the water had turned to blood. He screamed, dropping the bucket and moving backward. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind wandered in fear. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of the light, but deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. On the night before the wedding, Akintayo sat alone in his room, the fear and guilt overwhelming him. He wouldn't sleep, his mind replaying the events that happened that fateful night over and over and over again. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the house and the door cracked open. There, standing in the doorway, was Ibironke. Her eyes were filled with sorrow that cut through Akintayo's soul. She looked as she did in life, but there was an otherworldly glow about her. Akintayo's heart nearly stopped beating at the moment he saw Ibironke's ghost. Ibironke, is it really you? He whispered, his voice trembling. Yes, Akintayo, it is me. You thought you could bury your crime, but the dead cannot rest until the roots and the truth is revealed. Ibironke's voice echoed in the room, sending chillings down Akintayo's spine. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I am so sorry, Bironke. I was desperate and lost. I didn't mean to kill you. Please forgive me. Ibironke's ghost moved closer, her presence cold and heavy. You must confess, Akintoya. Tell the villagers the truth of what you did, or you will never know peace. The next morning, the villagers gathered for the wedding, unaware of the turmoil brimming in Akintola's heart. He stood before them shaking, Ibironke's ghost by his side, invisible to all but him. With a trembling voice, he began to speak. My friends, my family, I have a confession to make. Akintola started, his voice barely audible. The crowd fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. A year ago, I did something terrible. In a fit of rage, I hit Ibironke and she fell and hit her head. In my fear and panic, I buried her in the forest, thinking she was dead. But I was wrong. I was wrong to hide it, and I'm so sorry. Everyone in the wedding reception looked shocked and horrified. Disbelief and anger filled the air. Akintola stood there, feeling the weight of every accusing stare, every whispered condemnation. He looked down at his feet, Unable to meet the eyes of his fellow villagers, one of the elders stepped forward. His face was a mask of sorrow and anger. Akintayo, is this true? Did you truly kill your wife and hide her body? Akintoya nodded, tears streamed down his face. Yes, it is true. I was overcome with anger and fear. I acted rashly and have regretted it every day since. The villagers raised their voices, some demanding justice, others expressing their shock and sorrow. Akintayo remained silent, knowing that no words could undo the harm he had done. Chief Ade raised his hand, calling for silence. We must decide what to do. This is a grave crime and it cannot go unpunished. That night, Akintayo laid in his bed, the weight of his confession and the villagers' judgment heavy on his mind. Exhausted from the day's events, he soon fell into a deep sleep. As dawn broke, the villagers found Akintayo in his bed. He had passed away in his sleep, finally at peace with himself and the world. The story of Akintayo and Ibironke became a cautionary tale in Ore, passed down through generations, and it teaches us that in a moment of anger, one can make decisions that have irreversible consequences. Akintayo's impulsive act of violence led to a chain of events that caused immense pain and suffering. It is important to control one's anger and act with a calm mind. Thank you guys for your consistent support on this channel. We appreciate. Don't forget to share the story to your loved ones. Subscribe, like. Thank you for watching.